Welcome to Tenacity with Sonia C, the podcast for founders, entrepreneurs, dreamers, and leaders navigating the journey of growth. In each episode, we get into the setbacks, the rebuilds, the pivots, and the lessons learned along the way. These are honest conversations with leaders who face challenges head on and found success in business and in life. I'm your host, Sonia, and let's get started. My guest today is Kevon Saber, a founder who has built and sold multiple companies, including one to a Fortune 100. He scaled GoCheck Kids to 20,000 providers across the U.S. and grew its valuation by over 100 times. He's also co-founded ventures that generated tens of millions in sales, collaborating with global brands and athletes. Today, he isn't here just to talk about past wins. He's on a mission to change the way founders think about exits with his new company, Legacy Outcomes. After realizing the system was built for buyers, not entrepreneurs, he set out to help founders protect what they've built and maximize the legacies they leave behind. We're getting into the hard truths about selling a company, how to prepare long before you're ready to exit, and what it really takes to scale a business that holds value when it matters most. Hi, Kevon. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, Sonia. I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. I can't complain. Okay, so let me get to my first question. You've built and sold multiple companies. Now, with Legacy Outcomes, you're helping founders protect their legacy during exits. What was the light bulb moment when you realized the system was stacked against entrepreneurs?
After my first sale, I didn't realize that it was a systematic issue. I just
Okay.
thought that, hey, this is my first rodeo selling a company. I made some mistakes. We were totally outmaneuvered by the buyers and left a ton of money on the table. After my second exit, I didn't make, I didn't make the exact same mistakes then. I made different
Mm,
mistakes. I realized, wait a minute, I will have to go through 5 more exits before I get apprised of the main ways that buyers outmaneuver sellers. And so I began talking with other business owners who had their own exits. Some were tech
mm-hmm,
entrepreneurs, some were more traditional business owners, but almost everyone had a story of leaving money on the table or having some other regrets, like their employees not being cared for after the transition, that made me realize, wow, this is systematic. And so I started looking at the data and I realized,
mm.
wow, 80% of business owners have regrets over how they sold. And so it was the second sale that didn't go the way I hoped that sort of began the light bulb turning on. But it wasn't until
Mm-hmm.
I talked to more business owners that I realized this is a market that's rigged against first-time sellers in favor of veteran buyers.
And I find it super interesting that you talk about this because I'm in tech and a lot of tech companies get acquired and a lot of founders found these companies to get acquired over time. Why do you think that is? I mean, I realize it's systematic and I guess part of it is the founders are not aware or or is it because they're so excited about a possible exit that they just don't go out and look for the information and the resources that they need to get more out of that exit?
I think there's 3 big contributors, and you named one, which is just excitement. Your general
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline is running high. You start thinking about, wow,
I make money.
I've been making a ton of sacrifices for years. I've been getting paid less. I've delayed, certain things that I've wanted to do. For some people, it's buying a house. For other people, it's actually putting money towards retirement. For
Mm-hmm.
others, it's taking their family on a nice vacation. Um, and so, yeah, they start to get carried away with the ideas about what they're going to do with the money, and they get a little bit intoxicated with this exciting future, right? Um, Another factor is just pride. It's arrogance.
Mm,
There's a proverb that says that pride comes before a fall, and for many
yeah.
of us, right? And I was in this camp. There's a pride that says, well, and it's not explicit. It's really more below the surface. But if I can give it words, it's, well, I've been successful at building this business or
Mm-hmm.
scaling revenue, hiring great people. I'm good at business, and therefore I'm going to sell well. I'll be good at
Mm-hmm.
selling the business, right? the reality is that every business owner, every entrepreneur who's gotten their business to a certain point, they're smart enough to master M&A. It's not an intelligence issue. But the $4.7 trillion private equity industry profits off of confident first-time sellers. And that's why
Mm,
self-represented sellers walk away with 34% less than those who have representation. The way I say it now is that the biggest sale of your life shouldn't be your first, right?
mm-hmm,
The entrepreneur or business owner really should focus on just pushing their foot on the floor of the car or the pedal of the gas on growth, because that's where they're going to get the best ROI, as opposed to
mm-hmm.
now and trying to save a little bit of money by not hiring an advisor.
Right. And what are some of the things that an advisor can help a founder with that they haven't done themselves or they don't know anything about?
Great question. So again, everything that I'm about to say, the entrepreneur can learn themselves. They just
Mm-hmm.
it's not the best use of their time. So the first step is to prepare the company, right? Doing a deep forensic analysis to understand the strategic, operational, and financial building blocks, because those building blocks ultimately are going to be positioned in different ways for different buyers, right?
Mm,
When we are looking at the different universe, I'm sorry, the universe of potential buyers, we're looking at earnings calls and annual reports and general partner communications to limited partners if we're talking about private equity. And we have systems to scan that universe and understand where are the building blocks of this business a perfect
mm-hmm.
fit. And therefore, for which buyers is this business going to be a indispensable acquisition as opposed to a commodity? That's where
Mm,
buyers ultimately get excited to buy and decide to pay more, right?
yeah.
Recapping the financials is a different accounting exercise than maintaining financials that you're reporting to your VCs or the public markets even. Think about as part of the preparation phase, also creating a valuation that's defensible so that
Mm,
the buyers make their offers, you can say, hey, that's not appropriate for this reason or for that reason, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, Ultimately, the goal is not to sell.
Yeah.
The goal is to sell to the right buyer for the right price at the right terms, who will care for the team in the right way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Yeah.
difference between, uh, hey, I want to get married and I want to have a phenomenal marriage, right? The goal is not to walk up the church aisle and say some flowery words and then say I do, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I think about half of the people in the US and Canada get divorced. And those that stay married, most of them are not thrilled about their marriage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
it's true.
so the same thing is true for selling a business. Depending on what study you look at, 70 to 90% of entrepreneurs and business owners regret how they sold. And so the goal is
Mm.
not to be sold, is not to simply sell. It's to sell for a peak outcome.
What about those companies that, or those founders that start a company with the 1000% intent in mind that they're going to sell? Should they start that company and have specific policies or processes in place for that exit right from the get-go if they know that that's their intention right from the start?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is every buyer is going to care about a few things, and
Mm,
every buyer is going to care about idiosyncratic or unique things. It's important to prepare for the first list that every buyer will care about, right? Every buyer
yeah,
cares about a strong management team so that that entrepreneur is not required after they buy the company.
yeah,
Wonderful if the entrepreneur wants to stay around and wants to add value. But most of the time, the personality who starts a company and grows a company is not the personality who's going to fit inside of a bureaucracy, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, they don't have the patience. They don't have the temperament. They want to experiment much faster than a big company is able to, right? For example.
Mm,
So yeah, you want to have a strong bench of talent. Another factor is systems and documentation. For the buyer
right.
not to be dependent on that entrepreneur, they need to see that there are great systems. And that's going to vary by company. But if it's a B2B company or that has enterprise sales, they're going to want to see a really strong CRM with
Mm,
documentation on what customers go inside every stage, right, of the sales pipeline. They're going to want to see that pipeline quantified by number of customers and deal volume, in terms of expected value when you add up each of those stages. They're going to want to see the policies on actually delivering the value, whether
mm-hmm.
whether that's writing the software and having the code well documented, or whether that's the service processes that are required for those customers to be delighted. And so management, especially when you're talking about the team, systems and documentation. And then, of course, they're going to want to see that the economics are solid, right?
Mm,
Strong
yeah.
gross margins, strong net margins, strong recurring revenue. We've got 30 different metrics that we look at when we're taking a company to the market for buyers to review. And in many cases, we say to the seller, why don't you spend 6 months making these numbers better? Because right
Mm-hmm.
now you have four numbers that are going to tell buyers that this is a risky business. These are totally manageable. You can change them.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that's exactly what the sellers do. So yeah, I would say at the highest level, it's team, systems, and documentation, and then economics and unit economics in particular.
I mean, that's such great information for people who will eventually get there. And a lot of companies do get there at some point, but just knowing all of these different things that they need to think about and prepare for, I think is a huge help. With Go Check Kids, you scaled to 20,000 providers and 100 time evaluation increase. What did that growth journey teach you about building value that actually translates during an exit?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing that I did as CEO was to hire a phenomenal team, right? We brought in a new head of development, a new head of marketing, a new head of customer success, and
Mm,
lieutenants were able to create strategies, build phenomenal teams under them, and ultimately drive execution that all came together in that valuation increase. One of the things that we focused on really early was transforming our unit economics, what we just talked about. We had a powerful we had a powerful customer lifetime value. In other words, the customers who started using our product almost never left it because this
mm,
product was the first product in the industry that affordably enabled both pediatricians and family medicine doctors and their staffs to catch eye issues in children before they turn into
mm-hmm.
disabilities, blindness, or death. Now, Sonia, 1 in 5 kids in North America has an ocular abnormality or an eye issue
Oh, wow.
that leads to, again, learning or vision or a very premature death in the case of eye cancer. So there's a motivation from these doctors, these nurses, these technicians to catch these issues. They realized
Mm-hmm.
it's important, but they had no affordable way. So our product was a breakthrough. We delivered AI on an iPhone. We did that before AI was sexy, right? Nobody was excited about AI or AI in healthcare in 2014 and 16 and 18. I took over as CEO in 17 and ran the company for 5 years. And while our retention was really strong and therefore our customer lifetime value was strong, our customer acquisition costs were not great, right? We were
Mm,
paying more money to acquire the customer than the customer was paying us. And so we totally shifted the sales motions meaning plural. What we decided to do was to continue with the expensive outside sales reps that were going to the big hospitals who had hundreds of pediatricians and sometimes even
mm-hmm.
locations to serve these kids. But if it was a single practice, and most pediatricians and family medicine doctors in the US work in independent practices, we wouldn't send an expensive salesperson, pay for their flight, their hotel, and so on and so forth. We shifted toward inside sales. So a lot of this was
Mm-hmm.
digital customer acquisition and lead generation efforts for these doctors to say, I'm interested. And then we'd get them on a demo and, of course, help them understand how it would transform their clinical outcomes. And most of them purchased at that stage.
At GenPlay, you collaborated with global athletes and brands, generating 70 million in sales. When it came time to sell, what did you learn about how perceived value and real value show up at the negotiation table?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. The buyers were less interested in these brand relationships with the athletes because those all had an expiration date, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, these are licenses, they have a term, and in most cases, those terms are going to be 5 years. Well, we might be a few years into a contract. There's not a lot of time left. So I think a lot of people would think, wow, relationships with these athletes would be the most valuable thing. It actually wasn't. The most valuable thing was our team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our team had mastered creating or developing mobile games on a smaller device with weaker processors, less memory, a smaller screen. It's a very different experience than creating for an Xbox or a PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they also valued our recurring revenue. Most of the games we created were subscription games, and they thought, wow, like if I buy this asset, then I have a stream of income that will keep paying for a long time, particularly if the buyer plans to continue improving those games.
So let's talk about legacy a little bit. Legacy isn't just about money. It's about mission and impact. How can founders start preparing years before an exit, to ensure that their company's vision survives after they step away?
Yeah, there's several factors. So the most important one is whether they sell to a buyer who has the same values as they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every entrepreneur has values, whether they articulate them or not. For some of
Yeah,
them, all they care about is money, right? And it's
right.
important to be honest about that, if that's the case. For others, they really care about their team, or they care about their charitable impact, or they care about other factors like the purity of the mission. So let me give you some very practical examples. Let's start with the team. We spent 10 years refining our process to sell companies for the highest price.
Mm-hmm.
But Sonia, I don't know if it's just our clients, because I don't know what other M&A firms and investment banks clients do. But most of the time, our clients actually don't pick the highest offer.
Okay.
They pick the highest offer where they know the buyer will care for their team.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at buyer's offers, we're evaluating not just the amount of money and the terms, right? There's a number of structural elements associated with selling. Um, and that's everything from what percent is in an earnout, whether there's seller financing. Seller financing is not very common in tech companies, but it is more common in traditional companies. To many other factors,
Mm-hmm.
we have a list of about 10 of them on our website. Our process also looks at the offer letter. It looks at the benefits to the employees. When I say offer letter, I mean the offer letter to the employees that are being acquired.
Mm,
It looks at how the new employer, is going to handle the seniority of the people who are on the selling team.
right,
Are,
right.
are, peop are people who have been there for 5 years going to be treated like they're first year employees at the buyer's company?
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to go well, right? For those employees, they see themselves as having been there for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Um, we look at the cultural alignment as well, because again, it's really easy to get to the closing table. It's hard for a merger or acquisition to actually succeed. That's why statistically most don't. And so
Mm,
we get that work first and foremost because the sellers care for their employees. We also care about the buyers, and we want them to feel good about it 5 years later. And the probability will be much higher if there's cultural alignment. Another aspect is charity. So
mm,
a lot of sellers, they decided they're going to give a part of their company to a donor advised fund before they actually finalize an offer with a buyer. So a donor advised fund that enables an entrepreneur to donate, get the tax write off, and then actually disperse that money over time. They don't have to disperse it right away. So for
Mm.
example, if you're going to sell your company for 40 million, you might say, gosh, I want to give 10 million to charity over the next few years. So you can
Yeah.
give 25% of your company to charity. I'm giving you a simple example where the owner owns 100% of the company, right?
Yeah.
And you actually get that tax write-off, which is really helpful because you're going to get $30 million of proceeds in this case. And that's going to be a lot of taxes, right? Better to
Yeah.
have $30 million of proceeds plus a huge donation that you get to write off than to have a $40 million capital gain and then make smaller donations and then get smaller write-offs after the sale, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And so the most important thing to your question is to think about your objectives before you're evaluating offers. When you're evaluating
Mm.
offers, there's so many emotions, right? But if you can
Yeah.
think beforehand, okay, how much do I care about my employees' well-being
Mm.
after the sale? Before the pressure is on, that will serve you and your employees. If you think about, gosh, what do I want to do charitably?
Mm-hmm.
Well, much better to be dealing with that before you're signing a offer because after you sign an offer, the IRS can say, well, it was pretty much a done deal. We're not going to give you that tax benefit. And then
So
the last thing I'll just say real quickly on legacy, the most important aspect of legacy for a lot of people is their family,
yeah.
right? And so we encourage them and introduce them to experts who can help them refine their family mission, their family vision, their family values, and then actually put those into practice.
I want to run a scenario by you of something that a conversation I was actually having a couple weeks ago. So, big tech company in the US, family owned around since like the 70s or the 80s. I don't even know how long, but they've been around forever. Sort of ran the company. It became a very big company, but they ran it more like a family.
Mhm.
Employees had been there for 10, 20, 25 years. They grew that company to a massive size. And then, of course, 2, 3 years ago, they got acquired by a large VC. So what happened was they sold the company and a couple things happened afterwards. So employees who had been there for long periods of time got let go, number one. Number two, they wanted the return on investment. So I guess they must have done an analysis of the full company and realized that they wanted to raise their prices. So they raised their prices and lost a whole bunch of customers along the way because customers were not happy. And then, now the company is a very different company. And while they were going through that process, like to the outside world looking in, it's like this doesn't make any sense. There's something doesn't feel right here. So as a people who sold and exited and left, they're how can they control the outcome of what that VC is actually going to do with the company? Like, are they going to strip it apart and sell it for parts, or are they going to completely change the actual mission statement of the company and let employees who've been there for 20 years go and things like that? Like the example I just gave.
Yeah, there's a less important part of this and a more important part of it. The less
Okay.
important part is to identify the most important commitments you want the buyer to make,
Mm,
actually put that in writing. It's in
okay.
writing in the purchase agreement, right? Just like
Okay.
the price is there, the terms are there, you can have the purchase agreement specify details like not going to increase prices above a certain amount
Okay.
per year, or going to keep X% of the employees per year, which is could be stated differently, not going to terminate more than X% per year, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want that to be 0% because if someone's not performing or not showing up for work, they got to go, right? But the majority of the folks, right, that have built so much value are not slackers. The vast majority are hardworking, diligent, earnest people. You can put in a purchase agreement that the buyer will continue to be making donations to the community at some
Mm-hmm.
point, right? And you can even define the charities. If that's been a part of a long-standing history for a company, that might be a priority for a seller. So again, I said this is the less important part to actually put it in a purchase agreement.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's less important, because there's 1,000 things that a buyer might do that you'll never think of putting in the agreement,
Yeah.
right? And ultimately, it comes down to character. And so the best judge of their character is what they've done in the past.
Mm,
So a great M&A firm will actually interview other companies that have been acquired by that buyer before the offer is accepted to actually see how do they behave, right? That cultural alignment we talked about earlier is the more important part. And it's the
yeah.
part that most sellers forget about. It's a part that most M&A firms, brokers, and investment banks forget about. But you don't want it to come back and bite you. Yeah, there's
And
literally 1,000 things that are not known to business owners until they go through something like this, right? And so
yeah.
it's really important for them to decide, do I want to be intentional about this? Do I want to take a path that is proven? We call it the seller's power path,
Mm-hmm.
that's proven to provide leverage and control and a great outcome? Or do I want to roll the dice, right?
Yeah.
Do I want to take the most valuable asset I have and
Mm-hmm.
throw it to the wind and hope it turns out well? We call that the seller's path to regrets, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of studies. They all are different numbers, and almost all of them range between 70% and 90% of sellers have regrets over how they sold. That's why I said 80% earlier.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about like how many founders listening, particularly to this podcast, because it is catered to founders. They may be bootstrapping, and that's something that a lot of companies don't do as much anymore, or they're pre-revenue and think exit strategy is that far off, or when is the right time for an entrepreneur to start building with exit in mind?
Yeah, I think that the fundamentals that apply to all buyers and all investors are the fundamentals to build with from day one, right?
Okay.
Strong team, great systems, are two of the most important examples there. However, there's a big difference between I'm building exclusively for growth versus I have an eye on a sale. And once you
Mm-hmm.
have an eye on a sale, it's ideal at least a year out to start preparing, so that it's not a huge last minute cramming session, like
Yeah.
you have a test at the end of your academic semester and haven't done the homework and haven't studied all semester, right? You
Yeah.
want to be able to keep your eye, also your other eye, on growing the company, on fostering strong retention of the customers and the employees. And you don't want it to be a highly stressful event. That's where your decisions
Yeah.
suffer, right? Where you're not
Yeah.
sleeping enough, you're not exercising, you're not interacting with your loved ones, you're carrying a ton of guilt over those decisions. And so, yeah, I mean, the very highest ideal, right, would be to start preparing 18 months or 2 years out, even if it's small preparations during that time. But a year
Mm.
out, you definitely want to have a game plan for preparing.
Sometimes I get founders that think that if someone is interested in acquiring them, it's going to be a 2, 3 month process. And then I've met founders who exited and it took like a year or two before, when they started talking to a possible venture capitalist versus signing the contract, getting their money. So what is the average wait time from that initial spark to actually getting bought out?
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is that everyone who's interested in this topic needs to go read Mark Andreessen's article on Moby Dick,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
The famous, fictional story.
Yeah.
So what he says in the article, I'll summarize it. It's much better to read it. Is that inside a large corporation, there are 1,000 agendas, and not even the CEO knows what's going to happen.
Mm,
If you're a founder talking to a big company, if you're dealing with the CEO who owns 100% of the company, okay, there's still 100 agendas, but
th-
there's a much stronger agenda there that the CEO.
right.
Most founders are not talking to the CEO, and most CEOs of the companies who are making the acquisitions do not own anywhere near 100% of the company. They serve at the pleasure of the board, And if
Right.
enough employees are not happy with them, the board will fire them, right? And so
Yeah.
they're playing a political game, much like many of their subordinates are. And so what I'd say is, as someone who's been contacted by many big companies to acquire my startups, a little interest, a little spark from an acquiring company means nothing, right? They
Mm-hmm.
might be looking for information. They might be talking to you and five of your competitors. The people who are interested in what your company does might not be there a year from now. I've had that before. Another factor is the economy could change or something could change in the industry. So the focus of the company changes, and therefore you're no longer an exciting acquisition. And so for all those reasons, I'd say I can't even give you a time frame because most of those sparks don't go anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if
Right.
a buyer is really earnest, like they're making an offer, right? Then you're probably looking at anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Here's why. There's going to be several months of asking for information. There's going to be a month or two of negotiation. And then there's going to be many months of diligence.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason why, to your earlier question, Sonia, it's important to prepare well before going to market. Because if you can do the diligence in anticipation, then you've done is the pre-diligence. And so then the
Mm-hmm.
diligence period later goes by so much faster. We have private equity firms tell us all the time, wow, you've already done our work for us. So we only need 30 days of diligence or 3 weeks of diligence instead of, 5 times that duration.
So, like, one of the things I love to talk about on the show is not just success and how to build a company successfully and have an exit. I want to talk about like the ins and outs of every day. And you're a perfect person to do this with because you've had a successful career. You've had a couple exits, but can you give me like an example of one failure that you had and what was your takeaway from it and how did that make you a better leader?
Yeah, you want a professional failure, right?
It can be whatever you want. It can be personal.
In my very first company, there were two really strong mistakes that are coming to mind. The first is I didn't know those co-founders very well.
Mm,
I, in many ways, was really lucky that of the four of us, three of us were really aligned in terms of our values. And the most important thing is we want to do the right thing for our customers,
hmm
for our employees, and our investors. But we had a fourth co-founder who was so committed to success and that success happening fast that he was willing to compromise on integrity and even deceive customers, employees, and investors.
mm,
So I found myself over time spending more and more time cleaning up his messes, apologizing to people, making things right, uh, finding out how I could have prevented him from lying in the first place. And here's like the secret there. I can't keep him from lying. I can't change his character, right? And so the lesson there is you can change someone's skill,
hmm
but you can't change their character. If they have
Yeah,
a lack of hunger or a lack of integrity, and that's something that's important, those are important to you, it's incompatible, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's a powerful lesson. In that company, we also made a pretty large. Let me tell you about another mistake from a different company because I made
hmm
this mistake at my first and second companies. At Genplay Games, and again, we were a mobile game developer. We were one of the first to create multiplayer games that two people on in two different places, even on two different cell phone carriers, can actually interact. Now that's a given if you buy a game in the App Store. But that was novel in 2005. And I was not successful at persuading our team to just focus on this multiplayer concept. If we did,
Mm,
then our technology there would have gotten better and better and better. And it would have been hard for others to catch up. Um, that technology would mean less latency or a faster speed of interaction, right, for the people who are playing our games. It would have meant that we would have a reputation for
Mm,
much like Electronic Arts or EA first had a
yeah.
reputation for sports games, right? They would say EA Sports, right? Um, and I learned that lesson because in the first company, we spread ourselves too thin and we didn't get as much momentum in the areas that mattered most because we were trying to build too many products at once. My first company was serving the college market. My second company was serving casual video gamers, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what would I say? I would say really get to know your co-founders and before you start or before you hire senior people because it's much harder to separate than it is. Sorry, it's much harder to separate than it is to evaluate people up front. And then the second piece is focus, right? Pick
Yeah.
your target customer and how to deliver them the best possible benefits, which ultimately is a function of customer intimacy, right? How close are you to?
Yeah. So based on what you just said, those lessons learned, let's talk about where you are now in your new company. What is the one thing that you feel like right from the get-go, you did it right and it set you up for success? We talked about some failures. Let's talk about some success.
Okay. Yeah, with legacy outcomes, we sell 10 to $50 million enterprise value companies. We can go a little lower, we can go a little higher, especially if it's a software company, we can go
Mm-hmm.
higher. But we don't sell billion-dollar companies because we're not staffed for that, right?
Okay.
We're also really clear about who we serve and who we don't serve aside from enterprise value. If a founder or business owner has a different set of accounting books that they want us to show buyers than what they show the government, it's a
Mm.
non-starter, right? We won't work with them. If they have a legitimate, you know, house or apartment in Florida that they use for team retreats and customer meetings and a variety of other things. But let's just pretend that this is a guy who's married, but that's where his girlfriend lives, right?
Ah,
It's a non-starter for us, right? We're going to spend a lot of time in the trenches, understanding the business, understanding the team, positioning the team to get the highest price, the best overall terms, and a buyer who cares about the employees. We don't want to spend time with people we don't trust, right? Um, we also are we also have made a very strange choice, Sonia, which business owners love, entrepreneurs love. There's a lot of conflicts in the M&A world.
okay.
Most brokers, M&A firms, and investment banks have conflicts of interest that undermine the entrepreneur or the seller's position. And no one knows about this because it's very profitable. And so no one talks about it. But we talk about
Okay.
it, right? We don't represent buyers and sellers, unlike our competition. Why is that? Well, if you represent both, you're representing the buyer because the buyer
Mm.
is a repeat customer. So that's where your loyalty is, right?
Yeah.
We've taken a unpopular and unprofitable decision to say we're going to make less money on every transaction by just serving the seller. We're not going to take a dollar from the buyers. We're not going to arrange financing for the buyers. We're not going to pursue the seller's wealth management business after the sale, which a lot of investment banks do, which ultimately means we're not going to tell them what they need to hear because we're trying to protect the relationship. We're going to tell them what they need to hear because we want them to get the best possible deal based on their objectives, right? We're also
Right.
not on any retainers from buyers because, again, that would shift our loyalty.
Well, we're coming up on time, but before we wrap up, could you leave one piece of advice for founders who want to scale, sell, and still feel proud of their legacy? What would it be?
Yeah, it would be think about what matters to you. There's an article, we call it a field note on our website. You can find it under the owner's edge section. That's all about potential seller objectives. Go through that list and put them in high, medium, and low categories. And then
Mm-hmm.
as you're looking at buyers for your business and their offers, map those offers and those buyers to the objectives that you said are important to you. You're going to have 100 different influences as you're evaluating offers and negotiations. Emotions will be running high, your energy will be running low. So be prepared beforehand by knowing what matters to you.
Love it. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and all of the knowledge you've shared with our audience today.
Tanya, it was a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to thank Kevin for joining me today and sharing such an honest look at what it takes to build, scale, and ultimately exit a company. What really stood out to me is that legacy isn't just about the money, it's about protecting your mission, your team, and the years and sweat of equity you've poured in. For all the founders listening, if you're not yet thinking about your exit, this conversation is your wake up call. It's never too early to start building a business with both growth and legacy in mind. Remember, tenacity isn't just about surviving the founder journey, it's about ensuring the story we leave behind is one we're proud of. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining me on this journey of learning and growth. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building through a challenge right now. You can also connect with us on social media and be part of a community that believes resilience is the real advantage. Remember, growth isn't linear, success isn't guaranteed, and setbacks are part of the process. What matters is how you execute. This is Sonia signing off, but as always, keep chasing your dreams with tenacity.